Hey, this is Kip, and in this video, we're going to fly an ILS approach in the Cessna 172 Skyhawk with the G1000 in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. If you're unfamiliar with how an ILS works, I highly recommend watching my other video linked here first, where I fly it using the Cessna 172 that has the Garmin 530 and 430. However, you can just watch the first half of that video and then return here to see me flying the approach using the Garmin G1000 in this video. So I'm just going to get this started up, and then I'll go ahead and first take a best guess at which runway we might be landing at, and therefore which ILS we might be on. And we'll program that into the Garmin G1000 right here first before we depart. And if ATC assigns us a different approach, once we get within the range of Las Vegas, then we'll go ahead and switch over to the newly assigned runway. So as usual, I have SkyVector up to look at the charts. And we can see our departure down here at Kingman in the bottom right. And I just have a direct to route here straight to Las Vegas. And if you point over Las Vegas, you can see a little tooltip. Part of that tooltip is the current METAR. This one is 26 minutes old, it says. And if we look at the first line, it says Las Vegas, and then it says the Zulu time of the report, and then it says the wind. So it says 010 at 11 knots, so 11 knots at 010. So that means that if we were facing 010, we would have headwind directly coming at us. And in general, you take off and land into the wind. So any runway at the Las Vegas airport that is closer to a heading of 010 is probably the runway that's active. And if we take a look at the airport diagram for McCarran International in Las Vegas, you can see down here in the bottom left, there is a one left and one right runway. So that means that those runways are roughly at 010 heading. So those are perfectly aligned with where the winds are from and most likely active. Now it is possible they'll assign us any of the other runways, especially in the simulator. You never know what you're going to get pretty much, so especially with air traffic control. So we just need to be aware that they may give us something else and we'll need to adjust to land at a different runway. Okay, so we're all started up here at parking. I'm going to go ahead and set our flight plan up. So I spawned in right at parking with no flight plan or anything loaded in. So everything we're doing is directly with the G1000, and we'll file our flight plan with air traffic control as well. So I'm going to go ahead and set our departure airport first, which is, of course, our current airport, KIGM. And then we just add Las Vegas for the second waypoint, KLAS. Okay, and hit enter. So because this airport is untowered, we can't file our flight plan. So we'll have to do it once we're in the air and once we tune into an approach controller away from this airport. Next, I'm going to hit the procedures button down here, proc, and then choose an approach. And it looks like the ILS is only for runway 1 left, not for 1 right. So I'm going to go ahead and choose 1 left and hit enter. And there's only one transition waypoint available, so we'll choose that one. This is the waypoint that is the beginning of the approach procedure. So it's the waypoint you kind of start the approach on. And in this case, there's only one waypoint, but generally you'll go ahead and pick the one that is from the direction that you're coming from. So one of the waypoints might be towards the east or the west, and you would pick the one that's most appropriate for your course. Keeping in mind that when air traffic control actually assigns you an approach, they may change that transition point. So you have to keep your ears open for that when you're talking to ATC. And if you needed to change it, you would come back here into the procedures menu and then load the new approach, whatever it is, on the transition that you're assigned. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to just choose Cruddy because it's the only available transition point. And then when I highlight load, I'll hit enter, and that'll add it to our flight plan here. Lastly, I'm going to go over to the PFD here on the left side and click the CDI button down here to change to the GPS route for navigation. Instead of using nav1 and nav2 radios, we're going to use the GPS first. But because the ILS is radio-based, we will end up changing this back to use nav1 on our approach. So now what we can do is go ahead and file our flight plan. I'm going to go ahead and tune into Los Angeles Center right here. And here you can see request IFR clearance for instrument flight plan. So because we have at least a departure and an arrival airport in the GPS flight plan, that'll give us this option here. So we can go ahead and click this to request our IFR clearance. And they'll go ahead and give us an altitude and a squawk code. All right, so we read back the clearance.
Cessna November 20 Kilo India Papa cleared to Las Vegas Airport as filed. Squawk 6764.
So it said as filed. It didn't say anything about our, oh, there we go. Climb and maintain 10,600.
4,800 feet. Altimeter 29.902, turn left heading 29.5, proceed on course climb and maintain 10,600 feet.
Turn left heading 29.5. So we're going to do that.
Turn left heading 29.5, resume on navigation climb and maintain 10,600 feet Cessna Kilo India Papa.
So we already said,
India Papa, you are 76 miles southeast. Maintain
there we go.
heading and altitude, expect ILS runway 26 left approach via Preno transition.
Expect ILS 26 left to Preno. Cleared to Preno. So we're going to acknowledge the approach they assigned us. So I was wrong. It's not one left. It's 26 left. So we need 26 left ILS via Preno. So I'm going to go ahead back to select approach here. Hit enter. Move up to this approach field and choose 26 left. There's 26 left. Enter. And Preno is set as the transition. So now I'll scroll down to the bottom and then hit load, and that'll replace our previous approach. Now you can see Preno is the next waypoint on the list, so it's going to take us directly to Preno. And we can see that right here at the top of the PFD. So we're going directly to Preno, 58 miles until we get there. And they also gave us instructions to climb to 10,600 feet, so we're going to do that. Now what's interesting is he told us to turn to heading 295, but then he said to resume our own navigation. And then he cleared us directly to Preno. So the last thing he told us was cleared to Preno. So we can go back to navigation mode now that we are cleared direct to Preno and we have Preno set up in our GPS flight plan. You could see that we were actually almost on course already towards Preno. So the reason he had us go to 295 was to start us towards the course we needed to be on to go to Preno. So now that I enabled autopilot, just turning us back, getting us onto that course directly on that magenta line there. So what else I'm going to do to prepare for the 26 left approach is to set up the ILS frequency in my navigation 1 radio. So in the G1000, I'm going to do that by going to the waypoint mode. So I'm going to hit FPL to close the flight plan. Now you can see down here in the bottom, there's map, waypoint, aux, and nearest. If you turn the big knob, that'll actually go between those different screens. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the large knob until we get over to waypoint. So I'm just going to dial in Las Vegas here. So KLAS. Okay, so there's Las Vegas. I hit enter. And now we get all this information about that waypoint. So we have runways, and then at the bottom here we have frequencies. So if I turn the cursor back on and scroll all the way down, we can scroll through that list of frequencies and find the frequency for the ILS 26 left. And there it is. So now that I've highlighted that, you can see it's flashing. If I hit enter, it will put it up here in the standby field of the navigation 1 radio. So there it is, 111.5. Now I'm going to hit this button right here to activate it. Now I can go ahead and toggle the cursor off and then scroll back to the left to get back to the map screen here. So now that that's activated on the nav 1 frequency, I'm going to go ahead and turn on a bearing down here. I'm going to do that by clicking PFD right here. And then you can see these options, bearing 1 and bearing 2. That lets us choose another type of data to see for navigation. So I'm going to go ahead and click it once. And you can see down here it says nav 1, no data. So we know we have the right frequency tuned in. So right now we're just not in range of that frequency. And that ILS frequency represents the localizer. And the localizer will give us our horizontal guidance. And then once we get close enough, we'll get our vertical guidance, which is what the Glideslope does. But we only need to know that one frequency. So we're already tuned in and we're ready for it. All right, so I've gone ahead and brought up the approach plate for the ILS runway 26 left at McCarran. And so we can see the localizer frequency up here, 111.5. And then here we can see Preno. This is the waypoint that we're heading to. And you can see we need to be at 8,000 feet when we get to Preno. So because Microsoft Flight Simulator's ATC can be a little iffy and has some bugs mattering what approach and runway you're flying, I'm just gonna make sure that we're at 8,000 there. The air traffic controller should give us the instruction to descend to 8,000. But if they do not, then we need to know that we need to be at 8,000 feet when we get to Preno. Okay, so they just told us to descend and maintain 10,000, which is good. So we're gonna go ahead and descend. And there's the call for 8,000. So looks like just perfect timing there that I was just discussing, that we need to make sure that they accurately tell us to go down to 8,000 feet. So they just did that. So we're going ahead and starting our descent here for 8,000 feet. We can expect that after Preno at 8,000 feet, we'll have to go down to 6,500 by Larry, 4,900 at Shand, and then 3,800 at Relland. But when we get to Relland, we should have the glide slope in range, which you can see right there. And using the autopilot and the glide slope, we'll just go ahead and follow that down for our precision approach right there. All right, so we just leveled off here at 8,000 feet, which was the last instruction we got. Something else I'm going to do in preparation for the localizer is just turning on our nav1 radio so it can be audible. And we do that in the G1000 just by clicking this nav1 button right here. So now you can see that little triangle above it that indicates that it's now audible. So when we get in range of the localizer and it's tuned into that frequency, we'll hear a series of Morse code beeps coming through, and we'll be able to hear those now that this nav1 is turned on. And that's just another way to know when you're in range. Instead of just relying on looking at the G1000 display, we'll be able to actually just hear it.
Cessna Kilo India Papa contact approach on 120.45.
All right, they're passing us off to approach.
Delta 731 Los Angeles Center, continue as planned.
120.45 for Cessna Kilo India Papa.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and tune to approach and contact them.
Approach Cessna November 20 Kilo India Papa, 8,000 feet.
Cessna November 20 Kilo India Papa approach. Continue to Preno as planned. Altimeter 29er.
All right, continue to Preno. 29er on the altimeter, so I'm gonna go ahead and update that here with the Barrow button. 29er. Then I'm gonna go ahead and also update that down here on our backup instruments. And now we can hear the Morse code pattern coming in on the nav1 radio. So that's confirmation we're in range. And now we can see right here the code for the localizer, IRLE, just as we expect. And down here as well, that information is shown because we enabled that on that bearing 1 option. So I can go ahead and turn nav1 off. If we went ahead and changed our navigation source from GPS to use the localizer, it would turn us to the left immediately to try to intercept that line right there. But instead, we need to cross over Preno first, and then the GPS with the autopilot will turn us to the left towards Larry. And at that point, since we're going to be pretty much in a straight shot, we can switch over to use the localizer for our navigation right at that moment. All right, so air traffic control just said descend and maintain 6,500. That's what we were expecting.
6,500 feet Cessna Kilo India Papa.
Go ahead and do that. And you can see we're 1.4 miles from Premo. So they're letting us start our descent right now. Start there. And now once we finish this left-hand turn that's coming up right in a moment, we're going to go ahead and switch over to use Navigation 1.
Traffic is 2 o'clock, 4 miles at 8,400
Cessna Kilo India Papa.
All right, so now that we've made our left-hand turn, you can see right here that the magenta GPS course and the blue localizer course right here match up. So that means it's fine now for us to go ahead and switch. We're not going to have any drastic heading changes when we switch this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the CDI button right here. You can see now it says localizer 1, because we are tuned to the localizer, and you can see now the autopilot's following that to line us up. You can also see right here that we have the glide slope shown, and the glide slope is our vertical guidance. You can see that it's above us, which means that if we just straightened out right now, then the glide slope would come down towards us. So if we slowed our descent, we would basically catch up to the glide slope. Now what we're going to do is use the autopilot to follow that. And all we have to do to tell the autopilot to follow the glide slope is to turn on approach mode. And we just do that on the G1000 by hitting this APR button right here. Now remember, it's already following the localizer for our horizontal guidance because it's in nav mode. But when you turn on approach mode, you're telling it to also follow the vertical guidance. And in this case, it's the glide slope that's provided by the ILS. So the one part is the localizer for horizontal. The second part is the glide slope right here.
Cessna Kilo India, Papa traffic alert. 6 o'clock less than 1 mile, 7,200 feet.
So I go ahead and hit approach, and you can see GS shows up here now. It said there's a traffic alert.
Kilo India, Papa descend and maintain 4,900 feet.
All right, descend and maintain 4,900. We're going to do that.
Delta 830 traffic alert. 1 o'clock less than 1 mile, 6,600 feet Cessna Skyhawk. Report them in sight.
Less than 1 mile. Now, Microsoft Flight Sim ATC doesn't really separate the traffic at all, so I bet there's someone like right on top of us. Yeah. I think I have the traffic. When you land at a really busy airport like this and there's a lot of traffic sequenced in, it just doesn't separate you from the live traffic. Anyway, it's just how it is. We're going to just go ahead and ignore it. And sometimes because of that as well, air traffic control will give you a go around over and over again. So anyway, what we're waiting for now is just to capture the glide slope. So because the glide slope's above us, all I'm going to do is slow our descent so the glide slope catches up to us. So remember, it's above us like a laser beam shooting over our head. If we, from the ground, right? So if we slow down, it'll slowly catch up to the middle. As soon as it gets to the middle, because we've armed approach mode with the autopilot, that's why it says GS right here. It's ready for the glide slope. As soon as this green diamond gets to the middle, it'll automatically intercept and capture the glide slope and follow it automatically for us. So it'll pitch down for us to keep our descent going. And you'll see that happen in just a second here. I'm going to go ahead and slow us down even more, so minus 200. Just hitting a hotkey I have set up to change my vertical speed. So I'm just slowing our ascent, so it's about to capture. There it goes. So glide slope just captured. It's green now. So you can see that we are on the localizer and we're on the glide slope with the autopilot. So it's holding us on our horizontal alignment with the runway, as well as it's handling our pitch to get our descent going here. So all we have to do now, just like what we do with autopilot usually, is make sure we are managing our throttle. So I'm going to go ahead and pull us back a bit. I should have been a bit slower already, but I'm going to pull us back down into flap range. If you don't want to use autopilot and you want to hand fly this, you'll look at the green diamond here. If it's above the center, then you know you need to add some power to slow your descent. And if it's below, then you need to cut some power. So pull back on your throttle to increase your rate of descent to catch back up to it. So it's a little game you play, increasing and decreasing your throttle to keep that diamond in the middle. And then at the same time, with the horizontal guidance down here, if you're hand flying it, this line in the middle would be broken and to the left or right to tell you whether you needed to fly more towards the south side or more towards the north side of your heading indicator here to catch up to it. So if it's right, you turn towards the right or towards the north side. And if it's left, you would turn towards the south side to re-intercept that line so it's solid. And something to keep in mind, again, just with Microsoft Flight Simulator is that, and really any sim, not every single ILS approach is programmed perfectly. Microsoft Flight Simulator seems to have a problem with displaced thresholds, runway thresholds. So for example, Some runways have a lot of concrete before the actual threshold of the runway starts. And that concrete, that extended area, sometimes the ILS is programmed to bring you in where that concrete starts instead of where the actual threshold of the runway starts. That, there's so many airports in the simulator that not all of them will be perfect. Another indicator too is if we look at the PAPI lights right here, we can see that we're at the correct descent. We have 2 white and 2 red. So that means that we're not too high or too low. They say that red means dead. So if there's 4 reds, we know we're too low. So you need to add power. It's basically the same way the diamond here on the Glideslope works. So if this diamond was above us, that would mean that we're too low. So we need to be higher. We would need to go up to the diamond. And in that case, the PAPI lights would show 3 red or 4 red, mattering how much lower we are than we're supposed to be. So you can use those things all in conjunction during the approach to make sure that you're at the right descent. And of course, when you have a visual of the runway like we do right now, you can obviously see if you're too high or too low visually. It's more obvious. So at this distance, though, I'm just keeping my eyes on the PAPI lights just to make sure it's keeping us going at the right descent. And I'm also going to put in a second notch of flaps here since we're getting closer. Now, when we can disconnect the autopilot whenever, just because we have a visual of the runway. It's not necessarily going to be so precise that it's going to take us all the way down to the runway. And, minimums exist because you have to have a visual of where you're landing. So what we can do is if we were in cloud coverage all the way down until our minimum altitude and then suddenly broke out of the clouds and we could see it, then I would disengage autopilot as soon as I had a visual of the runway to hand fly in the landing. So we can see with the PAPI lights, I'm just going to let it bring us down pretty far. Okay, see we're at 3 red now, so that's worrying me a little bit because we're lower than we should be, and it doesn't look like the glide slope is bringing us up higher. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the autopilot right now. And I'm going to keep my eye on those PAPI lights. So to know if we're too high or too low. So you can see that we have 2 of those lights right now, so we're in good shape.
500.
Putting the last notch of flaps in. So we have 3 whites, so that means we're a little too high. So I pulled a little throttle. So remember, when you're coming in at a landing, your pitch is for speed. So I'm pitching up and down to keep us around that 65 knots. And throttle is for altitude. So I'm pulling back on the throttle right now because we have 3 whites. So I want to see 2 white and 2 red. And I'm also just keeping pointed straight at that before that touchdown point, like where the numbers are. Can't actually see the numbers. So we're still at 65 knots, pulling back on the throttle. And I'm just pulling the nose up now. Slow us down. Pulled the throttle to idle, just holding the nose up as long as I can till those back wheels touch. And then I'll slowly bring the nose down. Oh, and then roll to the left. All right, so we made it here successfully to Las Vegas using the ILS for our approach. Hope you guys found this video useful. As usual, please leave any comments and suggestions below. Thanks so much for watching and have fun flying.